Another day, another Carlsen game, and another Indian teenager who Magnus has to try and overcome. Now, this guy is an international master, but wait till you see him play. He's clearly on the route to Grandmaster. His rating is already over 2500. His name is Aditya Samant, and yes, from India, like I said, an absolute powerhouse of chess these days. So, how would Magnus get on with Black? Round 6 of the Qatar Masters, let's check it out. So we get e4, Magnus goes e5, no more messing about. We get knight f3, knight c6 and bishop b5. The Spanish game, or Ruy Lopez. Magnus goes a6, main line. You can go for an exchange variation, but the bishop drops back. We get knight f6, castles, and now Magnus plays with the move order. Usually, if you want to put your bishop on e7, you do it right now. You wait for rook e1, then you go b5. But Magnus goes b5 immediately, the bishop drops back, and from here, Black usually proceeds with either bishop b7, which is the traditional archangel variation, or bishop c5 is the modern twist known as the modern archangel variation. But Magnus now goes bishop e7, so it goes back down the traditional routes. Now, what's the big difference? Well, the rook never went to e1, the black king never castled yet, and without those moves inserted, white can now go d4 in one go. You do not want to take, or e5 actually blows you off the board out the opening, and if instead you then go d6, which is the best move, well, you can liquidate and force black to play this endgame. So obviously Magnus had some ideas here, he is the endgame goat, right? So we didn't go down this route anyway, the young Indian player didn't want to explore Magnus's prep, but usually this is considered not such a great move order. But rook e1 selected, now we get d6, no castles by the way, waiting to see if white goes c3 and then you marshal gambit it. Why not? Because that's quite drawish. So Magnus going for these closed routes, we get c3, castles, h3 now played. If you do d4 on the last move without this inserted, then bishop g4 can be very annoying, and now Magnus has got a choice. You often want to move this knight and then release the c-pawn. If you come to a5, this is the Chigorin variation, but Magnus goes knight b8, an old favourite of his. This is known as the Breyer variation, something he's been playing since a kid for 20 years, knows it inside out, and white goes d4, taking the centre. The knight redeploys here. You've lost some time, but c5 coming, it's very solid. We get knight bd2, bishop b7, and now this bishop just tucks back. You can close the centre, but it's not considered so good. White gets c6, starts undermining, black's fine. So bishop c2 played, rook e8 from Magnus, and he's starting a bishop remaneuver. We get knight f1, classic play from white. Bishop f8, knight g3, and g6. Not only keeps an eye on this square, stops this knight from hopping, but prepares now to fianchetto this bishop, and you've activated the rook in the meantime. a4 now from white. We're following absolute main lines here. If I go to the opening book on Chess.com, there's about 1500 games from here, or 1750. The main move here is pawn c5, classic position, but Magnus plays a move only played 85 times, the fourth most common. Knight b6 looks a bit weird because yes, you're pressuring this pawn, but what happens if a5? Well, the main move here to play is just dropping back, and then black's going to go c5 later, pressure the center. Just a different game, right? Maybe Magnus is arguing this one could become weak. Okay, he'd have had some ideas there. But white doesn't push on. b3 is played, just keeping an eye on these two squares, and now Magnus takes. The pawn recaptures, and he plays a5 before white can do it for a second time, and now rook b1. Very logical, hitting that open file there. We get bishop g7, and now here white goes for a way to win a pawn, but it's not the best. The computer wants to slow play this. Bishop b3, or what else? Pawn h4 apparently. That looks a slightly different move, but maybe you're going to try and undermine. But slow play anyway. But the white player takes on e5, spent 25 minutes. You know, this is a key moment, right? How do you want to proceed? What's your middle game plan? And this is where the weaker players, they burn through time trying to find these right plans. So we get captures. Now the queens come off. Magnus takes with this rook because this one's defending the e-pawn. But now rook b5 played, hitting 2 pawns, good chess. The knight drops back. And now the rook takes on a5. And I say good chess because white's doing okay here, but you know, you've let black equalise. White did have a small advantage. And now Magnus, a pawn down, but rook a8. He's winning it straight back because after the rooks come off, this one recaptures. You can't defend this pawn in time. You know, the bishop's on the back rank. The rook can't get there. So we see bishop e3. The knight takes on a4. Rook b1 hits this bishop, not worrying about knight takes here. And after bishop c6, now we see rook b4. And it sets a small trap. Because if Magnus takes this pawn, there's rook c4. You hit 2 pieces, that's winning for white. So Magnus goes bishop to f8, hits that rook, and white now is low on time. 4 minutes to a full hour for Magnus. This is where you start getting into trouble. Now, what does the computer want to do here? Well, take here. No time to take here, or you take here, and there's way too many pieces hanging. And so after bishop recaptures, you can then go rook b7. You know, the line could go something like this. You change off the rooks. Black's got the bishop pair, but the knight's pretty active, coming to c4, f3, then this knight can remaneuver. Should be okay for white, but obviously Magnus would torture with the bishops and just his superior skill, right? So instead of that, the rook now comes to c4, hits this bishop, hits the pawn behind, looks great, but Magnus now blocks the attack with the knight that is defended twice, and this rook is getting slightly stuck for squares. Does still have this one available, but then you walk into the x-ray. So now this bishop captures the knight, getting rid of one of those minor pieces that was in the way. Magnus takes back with the bishop. He didn't go with the knight because it's staying with the pawn. But hang on then, doesn't that give white a tactical possibility? Knight takes on e5 and the knight's overloaded, right? You take there, you lose the bishop and 2 pieces attacked. But here's a trick that Magnus now pulls out. This was the one from the thumbnail. He takes on f2 with check. The king recaptures, and so he's restored that material balance after knight takes on e5. Really nice harmony, because the knight now holds the bishop. There's no pawn to kick it, obviously. Things are safe. And the rook, meanwhile, is running short of squares. So it jumps to c5, targets this knight. That one now defended with f6. Bishop b3 check, king f8, king e3, and now Magnus goes rook a7, just taking care of this pawn a moment, and then soon he's going to march this king in, try and trap this rook. It did make me wonder, what if he went king e7 straight away? Well, now there's bishop d5. This is the problem. And obviously the bishop's pressured here, but if it moves, this drops with check. And so if you take and go something like this, just not so good. Now if king d6, there's knight e4 check as well, since the pawn moved, etc. So rook a7 accurate. Knight e2 now played, heading for d4. What if now bishop d5? I didn't actually check this one. Okay, the bar drops loads. Bishop a4 apparently. Why is this so good for black? I'm not clear. King d4 it says. Knight d7. Okay, it's this rook once again running short of squares. Yeah, okay, the rook is looking pretty much trapped. And now bishop b5. Right, this is the problem. So this is why we didn't get bishop d5. The rook actually starts running out of squares. So we see knight e2 played instead. King e7, knight into d4. King d6. Looks like that rook is completely trapped. But nice calculation here from Samant. He takes with check. Looks like an exchange sack, but there's knight b5 check. And this is why I was wondering what happened if the king marched in before putting the rook on a7, but then there were problems with bishop d5. Now, after the king moves, this is where the knight takes the rook. Hang on, wait, what? The rook was not captured. We've gone into analysis mode. He didn't take that one. He didn't go for this endgame, which is just level. Small edge to Magnus, but 4 pawns on 4 pawns, minor piece each, level endgame, right? He did not play that. Low on time. Instead, bishop d5 was played, going for a tactic, but it's a huge blunder in time pressure. Now, here's what Samant missed, right? So rook a6 is played to defend this knight. The pawn drops, attacking the rook, and it looks like you're forcing repetition. Because if rook b6 to stay defending the knight, well then you can hop to a8, the rook has to move, the knight comes back, etc. And sorry, I've gone there, but you'd have to come back here. And if you go rook a7, trying to counter-attack here so that it takes here, etc. Well, now there's knight b5, still a threat to win here on the next move. So the rook comes back and the knight comes back. Repeats, right? This is what white had in mind. However, what was missed is that after the rook is attacked, you can go rook a5 or rook a4. Either way it works, because now when the knight drops, which wasn't played, there's simply rook c5 and you hit 2 pieces at the same time. So whichever one you save, doesn't matter which, the other one drops off, and that's just an endgame where black's an exchange up for a pawn, technical win. So instead we see the knight jumping away, but this is hopeless. Knight e7 hits the bishop. It should drop to b3 to cover a4, but it comes here, allows rook a4, now the bishop drops back and this pawn drops. You didn't have time to defend with the king either, or the rook would have chopped it off from this square, and then the king chops the knight here. So after check, the king moves, this knight hops, and it forced resignation. Same kind of problems. This knight is about to drop, never mind the fact you're just a clean exchange up for a pawn here. And if this knight saves itself, you know, what if it went knight f8, hitting these pawns? Well, now there's knight f4 check, the king can run, check, this pawn drops, and this is just a technical win for Magnus. It's game over. So he does squeeze past this Indian teenager who blundered in time pressure, but a good fight nonetheless. These kids are good. I hope you enjoyed this one. Check out the video on screen for another epic game of chess, and thanks very much for watching. See you soon.